1. When I was in high school, I had decided to take a college course over the summer at a college in New York State for early college credits. I'm an art student, so I wanted to get some of my early art credits out of the way. Our dorm buildings were these old-looking houses with 3 floors. I was placed on the 2nd floor with 2 other students and her RA sharing a room. For context, I am a trans person, so they put all the trans people in one dorm. I had noticed something was off when I opened the closet at the end of the hallway, and there was a line of salt along it. My room was right next to that closet and had a mirror in it. I never liked mirrors. I've always believed in ghosts, but never thought I'd experience one. Later that day, we asked our RA about the salt line, and he told us that the building was haunted. He said that he had been here a week before we arrived to prepare, and had heard the closet door opening and someone walking down the hallway every night, so his solution was to put a salt line down in the closet. He also took it a step further and wrote protection symbols on the back of our name tags that were stuck to the door. I believe these symbols were pagan, but don't quote me on that. They pretty much roughly translated to telling the ghost to get out and it doesn't belong there. We thought he was just messing with us because we were kids, and it was our first college experience, so we shrugged it off. That night I was lying in bed. I had the bottom bunk, and I stared out into the dark. That's when I saw 2 red glowing circles that seemed to be between the mirror and the window outside. It scared me a little bit, but I just decided to go to sleep trying to rationalize that it had probably been a light from outside. The next morning, I went to check out the window. There were only trees. There wasn't even a close enough house nearby to be the neighbors, and though there was a road where you could hear cars, it wasn't close enough to shine a light in. That same day, my other roommate mentioned the blinds moving. Despite it being 90 degrees in the middle of summer, no wind, and our fans were off. The blinds moved on their own. Fast forward to Wednesday, the whole class took a trip down to a haunted theater for a tour. I thought this was so cool, and I recorded every room and everything the guide said on the tour. I've always been interested in this sort of thing, and was hoping I'd catch a ghost on camera. I didn't. That night, I was uploading all of the videos into a Windows Movie Maker file. I planned on uploading the whole thing unwatched and unedited to see if anyone saw anything. This took me hours, and I was still doing it once 2:30 a.m. rolled around. While I was uploading the videos into the file, I heard what sounded like a bus stopping outside and leaving. It was that sort of hiss that a bus makes when it stops. I thought nothing of it, as you often heard cars all night, but the sound returned. The sound got louder and louder to a point where I felt like something was wrong. I wasn't sure what else could make this loud hiss sound, so I thought since the house was old, maybe it was a gas leak or something I should alert my RA for. My glasses were just out of reach, so I had to get off my bed to get them. The second my feet hit the floor, the hissing stopped and I felt this pressure and numb feeling, kind of like when your foot falls asleep but without the pain, against the back of my legs. This scared the crap out of me, so I hopped back in bed until I had the courage to wake up my roommate. I crawled in bed with her and began feeling the same pressure and numbness in my lower back. I lay there terrified until about 4 a.m., when the pressure stopped and I was able to crawl back in my bed and go to sleep. From that point on, I was absolutely terrified of being alone, and it got to the point where my RA pulled me aside and told me to get over it because one day I'll be alone. Thanks for fucking with my abandonment issues, prick. On the 3rd week, it seemed like I would end up by myself, so I convinced the RAs to allow me to room with one of the girls upstairs. They fought me on this because they insisted that if I roomed with a girl, they wouldn't be keeping boys and girls separate, and they wanted to respect our gender but keep us separate from the cis boys. It was weird. From that point on, I had zero issues because, though we knew the house was haunted, the girl I roomed with had been raised to respect spirits and would often ask before entering the room, and thank the spirits for allowing them into the space. This is a behavior that I adopted as well, and it was much more peaceful in our room. 2. Spooky experience near Cle Elum, Washington. When I was 18, I went on my first trip alone to Seattle from Montana. I was alone with my dog, and it was a pretty normal trip overall, except we were driving late at night. I was listening to the BBC talk show on AM, and they were talking about some subject I don't remember, but it was spooky, and the radio was super static. We were in the area of I-90 that doesn't have much signal, and is pretty much just 100% empty and quiet before the pass. I suddenly got really tired and my radio wasn't working, so I decided to pull off to sleep. I decided to pull off on a deserted exit with no services before Cle Elum. I believe it was called 6 Mile Road or something like that. Anyways, it was extremely dark. I couldn't see anything to my sides or in front of me. There was fog on the road, swirling around in front of my headlights. There was absolutely nothing around me for a mile, and the road didn't veer off anywhere. After a bit of driving, I pulled up to this huge white and gray warehouse with no windows. There were several white vans and black cars parked around. They looked very expensive for being in the middle of nowhere. The warehouse was locked by a huge barbed wire fence. I backed up my car a bit and decided to park by the trees since it didn't appear that anyone was around. Everything was still dark and silent. There was no wind except for a slight breeze carrying the fog around the cement. I turned my car off completely and wrapped myself up in my blanket. I blocked all the doors. I was laying there trying to sleep, and looking at the time on my phone, it was 2 a.m. That same moment, my car started to physically shake. My dog started whining and hid behind the passenger chair, obviously distressed. I looked outside my window, but everything was pitch black without my headlights. I couldn't see anything, but my car was shaking back and forth and side to side, like something was grabbing it. I turned it on, freaking out, and backed up. There was still nothing around me at all, except for the strange facility. There were no animals, no people. My car stopped shaking as soon as I backed up. I had this horrible feeling of dread that I was being watched and that I wasn't supposed to be there. I left the area as fast as I could. When I got back to the road, I noticed that my car's time was now 4:30 a.m., and I had 1/4 of a tank less gas. It was already getting light out. I don't remember going anywhere, and my phone's time matched the car. There's only 1 hour of time difference between Montana and Washington, so it wasn't that. I still to this day don't know what happened there. I tried looking up the area with my ex on Google Maps a year ago, and I found a weird government facility near Cle Elum with a weird name that may have been the warehouse I went to. I'll have to try to find it again. It definitely feels like something I should not have seen. 3. I have wanted to share this story ever since it happened, but was always scared to. This has quite a bit of backstory, so strap in. It started back in 2011. I was 12 and had moved into a new home with my family. From the get-go, the place made me feel some type of way. It wasn't bad or good, just like I was always being watched, which of course creeped me out. There were a handful of hotspots throughout the house, one being what we called the pink bathroom, which was, as you can guess, all pink, pink tiling, pink sink, pink flooring, everything. It was also a bit small. I always felt like it was a bit hard to breathe in there, and overall just hated the energy. I figured maybe I was just claustrophobic. Another was this part of the hall that led directly into my bedroom and branched off directly into the living room as well, kind of like a T in a road. Anyways, you almost always felt eyes on you coming from that corner, whether you were in the living room or my room, and it felt just as creepy regardless if it was morning or night. The final spot was, of course, the basement. The basement was half finished. The finished half was like a bar area, had the stools and everything still there, and the unfinished half was the laundry and storage and workshop. Actually, when we first moved in there, my dad, sister, and I were looking through the workshop. There was a bunch of old yearbooks from the school I went to, and other memorabilia. We took a break, headed upstairs for lunch, and came back to find that the door would no longer open. It seemed the door handle had fell off while we were away, and the door was stuck in place. Not super sure how that could happen. especially considering it locked from the inside and none of us locked it. On top of that, my mom made my sister and I wash our dog down in the basement. We had a laundry area and a big tub sink, but we hated doing it. I always felt when I was down there that someone was just watching me. I even had an idea of what he looked like. I imagined a very tall man in a button-up and slacks standing in the corner right by the entrance to the back of the bar area that resided mainly on the furnished side. My hair would stand on end, and always I would sprint up those stairs whenever I was done down there. The rest of the house fell off, but those were the big spots that just radiated energy. Anywho, let's actually fast forward a few years. We moved out around 2014, and by that point, I had a handful of bad dreams about that house. I had dreams of it when I lived there, which made sense, but even after leaving, they persisted. They actually persisted up to 2020. By that point, I was 21 years old. I had been having dreams of that place for nearly a decade, and by this point, the dreams escalated to night terrors. I would wake up screaming in the middle of the night. The dreams always occurred every 3 to 6 months. But by April of 2020, I had 3 intense night terrors about that house within 3 months. The last dream being my sister telling me someone had died in the pink bathroom. I started realizing that maybe something else was going on. I started researching the house and found the first owners, the ones who had built that house back in, I believe, the 1950s. This seemed like a good place to start. I quickly discovered that it was a family that lived there, and that the father had died in the house in the 1980s. Upon further investigation, I learned he had died with a massive heart attack in the house. This house was located directly across the street from a hospital. Like the driveway and the hospital lot entrance lined up. Definitely clued me in on this being a traumatic death, so I continued. I found his wife's obituary. She stayed in the house after he had passed. And since she had passed more recently, the information regarding their children was more up to date. I immediately felt drawn to one particular child, their one daughter. I actually ended up finding her on Facebook and reaching out. Of course, I realized what I was about to do could be potentially harmful or hurtful, so prepared my message accordingly. I even mentioned the hotspots we covered earlier. I didn't mention what sensations or events happened in those areas, though, since I wanted to see what she had to say. My heart stopped when I read, "Died in the pink bathroom." The last dream where I dreamed my sister told me someone died in the pink bathroom. Could it have been a weird coincidence? She continued to say that he loved his workshop and that he never let anyone in it, and on top of that always spent time downstairs by that corner entrance to his bar, since that's where he kept his favorite drinks. My bedroom belonged to his wife, who no longer loved him the way he loved her, which would make sense as to why I felt eyes from the doorway, but never would that presence enter my room. She also shared she was the child closest with her father, and they shared the room my sister stayed in. I asked my sister about this later on, and she stated she definitely felt uncomfortable in the house, but never any specifics. I told the daughter the man I saw in my imagination was a very tall, well-dressed man. She said her dad was 6'3", and a businessman always in a button-down and slacks. She also sent me a picture of him, and it was the exact same man I saw in my head. After this, I have never had another dream involving that house ever again. It has been almost 3 years free of those awful dreams. Could he have used me to tell his daughter he was so close with he was still around? That there was more to the other side? And the only way to get my attention was through my dreams. It almost seems so self-absorbed to think he would choose me to do such a thing, but I'm not sure of any other explanation. All my life I've had weird paranormal or borderline psychic occurrences, but this one is definitely the most interesting to date. 4. I'm currently a 38-year-old female, and my first experience took place when I was approximately 3 or 4 years old. I can't remember my exact age, but I do remember I was still wearing those cartoon character footy full-body pajamas that were popular in the 80s for kiddos that zipped all the way from toe to the chest. Oh my goodness. I'm just cackling thinking about them. Why, oh why, was the zipper so long? Okay, I'm getting off track. Back to the story. During that time, my great-grandmother, we'll simply call her Nanny, on my mom's side was living in a nursing home. At that age, I'd never known her to live anywhere else. From what I knew then, and heard from my mom later, Nanny loved me to pieces. She loved getting visits from my brother and me. Of course, there were times she terrified me halfway, spitting out her dentures on purpose, but that's another story entirely. One night in particular, my mom put me to bed as usual. I remember nodding off and started dreaming. I was suddenly awoken, not in a scary way, but as if someone had been calling my name, trying to get me to wake up in a soft voice. When I opened my eyes and looked around, I finally saw Nanny standing next to me by my bed. At the time, I didn't find her change in appearance weird or abnormal, as she looked like herself to me. I could see her whole body, and she was dressed in a light-colored white or cream-colored long dress, almost like a fancy nightgown, and at least 20 years younger than I knew her to be. She had a glass of milk in her hands and asked me if I was thirsty. I realized that I did feel a little parched, and said yes. As I stuck my hand out to take the offered drink, she swirled out of focus and reappeared farther away in my bedroom, toward my closet. She waved to me and said, "I only came to tell you I love you, and that I will see you again someday real soon." She then turned toward the closet and walked away, fading out of sight as she went. Afterward, I quickly went to sleep and awoke the next morning smelling this amazing smell. I could even envision what they were. Biscuits. Large, fluffy, buttery, flaky biscuits that were the size of my head. It smelled so amazing. I knew that meant Nanny had decided to stay and make us all breakfast. I was so excited that I jumped straight out of bed and flew toward my door, almost knocking my mom back in the process from surprise that I was there. She asked me what I was so excited about, and I told her it was because I could smell Nanny's baking biscuits in the oven, and I wanted to see her and eat them. I could imagine slathering butter on them and sprinkling them with sugar. At the time, I didn't interpret her look well, only knowing that her face was ashen for a quick second. She then changed her look and got down to my level to explain to me that it's not possible because Nanny has been in the hospital for some time and went to heaven the night prior. I was distraught, but unbelieving as I could still smell those biscuits. I'm not sure how long it took for my mom to convince me, but I do remember that I made her let me walk in the kitchen and through the entire place to see there was no sign of my Nanny anywhere. My heart broke that day, yet I also knew that heaven was a great place and that she was likely having a great time until we could see her again, as I'd been told before about people passing. Something I didn't find out until years later when I brought up that long-ago memory was my mom's side of the story. She told me the moment I told her about the biscuits, she was quite shocked. Like I stated before, Mom said I'd never known Nanny prior to her being in the nursing home, so I was never able to experience her biscuits or any other types of cooking. My mom went further to say that the topic of their meals growing up also never came up when I was around. She explained that growing up, her family was quite poor. However, due to the older members living through the Great Depression, they learned to stock up on certain canned and pantry food items. One thing in particular they ate a lot were biscuits. Nanny was known around the family for these gigantic fluffy concoctions that were big enough to be a meal on their own. Everyone would put butter on them in the mornings with sugar and cinnamon, or eat for dinner with beans. She said that day if she'd had a question about the other side. My description of a thing I'd literally never heard of nor witnessed was a testament to that. 5. So the house I live in was built sometime in the 40s, and it sits on 5 acres of land. I live in a very small town, smaller than small. I call it a microtown. It's hardly even a town, there's not much there, and it's pretty rural, but nested between 2 other cities. Only about a quarter of our land is clear, the rest is dense woods. We don't go back in there often because of ticks. However, my boyfriend has been throughout the whole property, and he came across what used to be another house deep in the woods. It looks as though it burned down. All that's left is some bricks, which match the bricks of our fireplace and front porch, and the cement blocks the house once sat on, which match the cement blocks our house sits on. Our house is all wood except for vinyl siding, which was probably put on in the last 30 years or so. I'm assuming the old house burned down and the original family rebuilt the current one we live in now. All 5 acres have remained as one property over the years, so the original family owned every bit we own now. There is no record, to my knowledge, of the house we found in the woods, so there is no telling how old it is. The town was established in the 1830s. Something odd to note is that there are no cemeteries here. I do know that it was common to have a family plot on your property, and most homes here sit on at least a few acres. Honestly, I believe there could be a couple of people buried here, but we haven't found any headstones. But also, if they were marked with flat headstones, they could be possibly grown over or covered. So, here's where the paranormal aspect comes into play. A few months ago, I was getting ready for work. I was in the bathroom with the door open. The bathroom is at the very back of the house. I suddenly heard a woman talking. As I stepped out into the hall, it stopped. I walked around and made sure the TV wasn't on, computer was not on, and it wasn't my phone, which was right next to me. I brushed it off and carried on. I told my boyfriend's dad about it, and he mentioned seeing a figure in the living room and dining area, which is where the woman's voice came from. A few days ago, while I was at work, my boyfriend was here alone in the office at the back of the house by the bathroom. He was messing with a knife or something, and all of a sudden, he hears a woman laughing, and it sounded like it came from the front of the house. He's a skeptic and has never had a paranormal experience, but he texted me right away. I reminded him of when I heard her talking. 2 nights ago, we were sitting on our bed with the door open, right across from the kitchen. We had the lights off aside from the lamp in our room. He looked at me and said he just saw a figure walk across the kitchen toward the dining room. I've never seen a figure myself. We aren't scared. Whatever is here seems friendly. I wish I knew more about the history of the property. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Paranormal Stories, episode 307. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Alright, before you go, please do hit the like button and share the video around with friends and family. Let's make Christmas spooky. Okay, let's move right along to Hellfreezer's question of the day. And today's question is, what question do you wish that people would just ask you less? I'm gonna say, how are you? Now, that doesn't apply to people that know and love me asking, how are you? They mean it, they want to know. But strangers casually asking that of people they barely know or don't know at all, because they don't actually want the answer. So, get rid of the insincere questions. I think that would be much better for people all round. What are some of yours? Please pop your answers in a comment below. With that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.